Greetings and welcome to my video series, How Not to Do Business. My name is Paul B. and I am the Homeless Consultant. And the topic of today's discussion is going to be teamwork. What is teamwork? What is a team? Why is it important? We're going to find out. To start things off, of course, if you haven't watched the introduction, please do so. In the introduction, when I was talking about the owner of the truck wash, Mr. H, I told the story of how one time I was washing a truck all by myself, which was fine with me because I know I'll do a good job on both sides, although it does certainly take longer. And in this case, Mr. H came out into the wash bay, as he often did, usually to tell me to hurry up or something, quit doing such a good job, that kind of thing. And in this particular case, he picked up the other power washer and just started washing the other side of the truck. And he looked across the truck at me and kind of held up the power washer and said, "Teamwork!" with that big old smile on his face. And the question is, what was he talking about? Why did he say the word teamwork in that circumstance? Was that really teamwork? Was there a team in action somewhere in that? We're going to find out today. Now, one of the most used and abused, ruthlessly abused words that I've seen in the business and corporate worlds over the years, especially since the establishment of political correctness, one of the most abused words is the word team or teamwork. And it's a crying shame because a real team is an amazing sight to behold. There's really nothing like it. And to be a part of a team like that, again, there's just nothing like it. And yet, we have companies all over the place. They have signs up there that say, "Join our team." Or they call their employees team members. You got a question? Ask a team member. And again, the question is, are these really teams we're talking about, or are these just groups of people who work together? And if a team is something different, then why is it important to make the distinction? And why could it potentially be a problem if companies go around calling these groups of people teams when they're not, in fact, teams? And again, this kind of began back when political correctness and when personnel departments were replaced by these things called human resource departments. There's another phrase that companies throw around, team player. And it's amazing. Now, you probably know what I'm talking about there. The word team player has become a dirty word. What a shame. If you're a real team player, then you're worthy of an awful lot of respect, at least in the context of that team. But the way that companies and businesses throw the word team player around, it's usually, let me put it this way, calling someone a team player is no longer a compliment, and instead it's used as an insult. It's used as a form of shaming people when you tell them that they're not team players. That's what's happened, again, through political correctness and human resources, that kind of thing. All this psychological manipulation of employees that has been going on for the last 30 some odd years. So what I want to talk about today is real teamwork. Why it's important, why it's worthy of praise, why being a member of these awesome teams. And I'm going to use the phrase, I kind of hate to use this phrase, but companies use it, world-class teams. Now what does that mean? Who knows? To me, I just use it to mean absolutely extraordinary teamwork, something that is awe-inspiring. Now that's usually not what it is. Companies throw out the term world-class all the time as well, when often they are pretty low class, not world class. But I try, if I'm going to use the term world class, I mean it to mean something truly extraordinary. And this discussion of teamwork is relevant all the way from the assembly line and the janitorial staff, all the way up to executive management and the board of directors. And yet, what do you find? I mean, a casual glance at most companies out there, a large company like the medical device company that I worked for previously, a couple years ago, um, before I worked at the truck wash, the janitorial staff showed more teamwork than the executive management did. And the assembly line showed a lot more. That's probably where the teamwork was the most obvious, the real teamwork. So what is going on when executive management, they're the ones paid all the money, why can they not form a real team? But again, we have to look at what a team is to kind of understand that. So that gives you just a little background on what I'm looking at today. I just wrote down some things of what a team involves to me, what teamwork is, the real thing, not these posters that, and that have teamwork or Mr. H just shouting the word teamwork, or signs that say ask one of our team members. I mean a real team. What's involved in that in the real world? Well, I think first and foremost you have to have some clearly defined goals that everybody in the team understands. If you're not moving toward the same goal, if you're not moving toward the same thing, then what are you? How can you be a team? You are just a bunch of random people doing something together in the near vicinity, sorta, kinda, in the same place, that sort of thing. You have to have clearly defined goals, and they have to be clearly defined so that every member of the team can see the bullseye of that target. And no matter where they're coming from, even if you have a team that's spread across the world and you work with each other with teleconferencing, if they're all have their eyes on that same bullseye, then they're focused on the same thing. So you have to have clearly defined goals. If you're an Olympic team, your goal presumably is a gold medal. I would hope that none of them are aiming for, just a medal, but they're aiming for a gold medal. Second of all, clearly defined duties and responsibilities. Within the team, if people don't know what it is they're supposed to do, then they're going to start stepping on other people's toes, and they're also not going to learn to master what it is that they do within the team. And I have to be honest with you at this point. One reason I'm not going to talk about athletic teams so much in here is just because I don't like sports. I don't really care about sports, and I don't know anything about it, but I have a lot of respect for them, certainly, especially I'd say basketball, but football as well. But really any athletic team that's worth anything is going to exhibit teamwork. That's the classic team, right? But I can't use some examples just because I don't know anything about sports, so I'm not trying to diss athletic teams here. I just don't know anything about it. I am going to use drum and bugle corps because that's something I know. But so forgive me when I use this example if I sound like an ignoramus, because I actually am. But my understanding is that in football, the players have different purposes. The receiver is going to catch the ball, the quarterback throws the ball. You've got people blocking who are, I guess, protecting the quarterback, right? Now, if they don't understand what their duties are, how can they fulfill their function within that team? You see, the team has to have designated duties, and those people need to train to be as good as they possibly can at that duty. That's part of teamwork. Number 3, standard procedures. Okay, now they have to be standard. There may be many of them. There may be many alternative procedures, but there have to be standard procedures. In other words, people aren't just going out ad hoc doing whatever they think is best at the time. At least not within the context of everything else we're talking about in the teamwork here. There might be some room for creativity and things of that nature, but you can't just, let them run wild out in the wilderness and see what happens. That's not teamwork. Teamwork means that within their duties and responsibilities. For example, again, I'm going to talk out of turn if I talk about a quarterback, but a quarterback and the receivers, I have to believe they have practiced throwing the ball. I have seen cases where I guess they're called receivers, and they go running out there. They bust through all these people trying to stop them. They go running out there, and they get right to the very end, right by the end zone, and they turn around with their hands up in the air, and the ball is already in the air. It just falls right into their hand, and then they run the rest of the way for a touchdown. Now if that isn't awe-inspiring, what is? And you're not going to tell me that the quarterback and the receivers have not practiced that. Okay, that didn't just happen. That is teamwork. Those are standard procedures. All the different plays in their playbook are standard procedures. And there may be a lot of them. And there may be alternatives. And they may be something that they can change from one to the other on the fly by giving some signals. And, you know, you see that, I guess, in baseball, too. Those guys are down there moving their hands around doing, you know, doing all these weird things. And I don't know what they're saying, but they're communicating something to each other. They're saying, you know, throw a curveball rather than a fastball or something like that. The one and only time I wish I knew something about sports, because it is a good example. Evaluation. As you're going about all of this, you have to have somebody who's evaluating the performance of the team members. And critical in the sense that you're looking for what's good and you're looking for what's bad, but it's more like critical thinking. Critical thinking does not mean you are a critic. It means you are competently analyzing the situation. And it's the same way here. You have to analyze your team members. How are they doing with those duties and responsibilities they have within the team? How are they doing toward the group's goals that are clearly defined, etc.? So you have to have some form of evaluation, because there's not a good team is going to always improve. They're not just going to get to a certain level and be stagnant. They should keep improving indefinitely, to be honest. So there has to be some kind of evaluation. There has to be practice and rehearsal. And I kind of mentioned that before with the football players. You know, that ball did not fall into the receiver's hand by accident. That was planned, that was practiced and rehearsed. And that's why the quarterback could put the ball right where it needs to be, and the receiver could trust that that ball will be there. When, after they finished running, you know, at full speed, they have a little leisure to turn around. They know the ball's going to be there. That is teamwork. Scheduling, you know, in the business and the corporate world, if you have a team and they're not scheduled properly, you know, they're not there at the same time, or if you have an international company, if you're not considering the fact of all the different time zone differences, your team can fall apart. They have to be able to communicate with each other, and I guess communication would be yet another one along those lines. But scheduling from a management standpoint is, I'm going to add this in here, scheduling from a management standpoint is very important to maintaining the integrity of a team. You don't want the people being disconnected. You know, what good is it if the receiver practices on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the quarterback practices on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday? You know, they're not there at the same time, right? Synchronization. Now, that, again, you kind of want to get into sports teams. If you look at synchronized swimming or, you know, river dance, dance troops and things like that, you think of synchronization as people doing the same thing at the same time. This is one of the things I love about drum and bugle corps. You know, I was in the snare line, if I can find my other stick here, and if I'm doing this beat, the guy right next to me is doing the exact same thing. At the exact same time. That's synchronization. And that's the more like synchronized swimming kind of synchronization, like a dance troupe would have. But there's also synchronization within a team if you're involved in a project that's moving forward. You're not sitting there repeating the same thing like an assembly line would. An assembly line is going to have more of that kind of synchronization, like I did with the sticks. But there's also synchronization as far as if you have engineering and marketing and they're moving forward according to, you know, the principles of project management. They need to see themselves as synchronized. And that's part of what we're going to see in a moment with a leader, a project manager or something, is really responsible for maintaining that synchronization. You also have to have familiarity and comfort with the other team members. You want at minimal and at ideally no discord. I mean, you want these people to really be friendly with each other. Now, they may not be friends outside of work, but in the context of when they're at work, you want them to get along with each other, and that means you're either going to have people of the same temperament, sense of humor, sensibilities, that kind of thing. Or ideally, even better, you're going to have people who are so competent and confident, and they're so well developed in terms of their social skills that they can get along even with people who have different temperaments. Because when you have people with different temperaments and senses of humor and things of that nature, sensibilities, it brings more into the group. You know what I mean? If you know, you start looking, forgive me for using this word, but it's true. You start to look like a cult if everybody has exactly the same sensibilities, the same sense of humor and everything. If everyone's exactly the same, you start to look like a cult. And it's not to say you can't get things done in that, but it kind of depends on what you're trying to accomplish. But if as a team you're trying to accomplish something extraordinary, or frankly to accomplish the impossible, look at the moon landings. Okay, those, I don't think when they decided to land on the moon, when Kennedy issued that order, I think in 62 or 3, by the end of the decade. So they had about 7 or 8 years to go from, pretty much, a brand new aerospace industry that had only been tested in war, and now they want to go to the moon and return safely. I don't think they were trying too hard to build teams there where everyone was exactly the same. I think they were looking for the people with the most talent, and they could get along with each other, and they had that's the definition of a clearly defined goal. Send men to the moon, return them safely to Earth, and people's lives were at stake. So they had more leisure to be broad. They might have people with different sensibilities and senses of humor, and they could get away with that. I think that's the best way to go about teamwork, because once you get people who have that narrow-minded view, you get into intolerance, and that's going to create discord. You get into people who are judgmental. They start worrying about personal issues, the way someone else behaves or the way someone else speaks. You're going to have people who are timid, and you're going to have people who are outspoken, and if they start worrying about those kinds of things, that's where you get, sand in the gears of your team. So I really think you should seek out, instead of, because a lot of even team leaders they'll say, they might be, let's say the team leader is more of a timid person, and then they get some boisterous, outspoken person on the team. But you know what? That person has an awful lot of important things to say. But if the team leader doesn't like it, they might want to get that person out of the team. And it's a shame, because that person's bringing a lot of stuff to the table that wouldn't be there otherwise. They're expanding the horizons, the potential, the possibilities of your team. And it could be the other way around. It might be that your team leader is a very boisterous and, personable person, and there's someone on the team who's rather timid. Now, of course, you have to have a certain degree of social skills to function properly in a team, but depending on what this team is, that timid person might be just the right person you need in that function. In other words, you want the personal stuff out of there as much as possible. And again, focusing on that goal is what allows so many people who are so different to get along. When we go to war, World War II, you had farm boys, college graduates, rich kids, poor kids. You had all kinds of people joining up for the military to defend their country after we were attacked at Pearl Harbor. And these people came from all walks of life. They're not going to get along together very well out in the country, in the real world. And it's unfortunate. If they saw themselves as, Americans, they would get along better. But in the real world, they're not going to socialize with each other. They're not going to get along that well. And yet those people eventually formed some of the most potent teams the world has ever seen. And they went over there and they did the job that needed to be done. Why? Because their clearly defined goal was so important to each of them. They didn't want Japan coming over and bombing their families, for example. Just because the United States has never really been attacked on its own soil, except for things like 9/11, but it hasn't been attacked in a military sense in any way. Like, Europe was just a smoldering ruin. Look at Syria today. Damascus, a smoldering ruin. Americans have never had to deal with that. And that was one of the focused goals that these team members who joined up in the military in World War II had on their minds. And because of that, they could overlook all their other disagreements. Alright, so along those lines, you have to have a collective drive to succeed. You have to want to meet the goals of the team. And if you're trying to achieve something extraordinary that's never been done before, or you're trying to, the goal is set, the bar is set really, really high. Everybody on that team has to have a commitment and a drive and a motivation to make that happen. It kind of comes down to you're as strong as your weakest link. It depends on the makeup of the team. That isn't necessarily true. Um, if you're dealing with something like an Olympic sport, yes, that's the case. You need all of them to be at their very best. But again, it depends on the designated function. But they have to have a collective drive toward the success of the endeavor. To the extent that it's possible, and I know this is a tough one, a truly extraordinary team, what you might call a world-class team, the people on it, at least while they're fulfilling their functions as a member of that team, they need to leave their egos at the door as much as possible. This is about the team. This is where you become part of something that is greater than yourself. And if you all do that, then the team itself is greater than the sum of its parts. And that's where you get these outrageously impressive teams. Teams that, when I study teams and teamwork, and I do this a lot, I mean, to be honest, it often brings tears to my eyes. It is such a beautiful thing. It's humanity at its best. And unfortunately, it can also be humanity at its worst. The Nazis put together a pretty effective team for the things that they were doing, for example. But you really have to leave your egos at the door. Now, I'm never someone who's in favor of people leaving their individuality, their unique identities at the door. And I think any company that tries to stomp out those unique identities it's doing itself a disservice. I think it's kind of a crime against humanity in a way. And it isn't necessary. Too many companies do that because it's the people at the top, or the people running the team, they can't check their ego at the door, and they start trying to stomp out people's individuality. A competent team is full of individuals, and they might be very, very different from each other, and that's what makes it so beautiful. That's what makes it so amazing, awe-inspiring, is that you have these people who are so different, and yet they're coming together toward this common goal. So you have to check your egos at the door. And that doesn't just mean, one person on the team who's really loud trying to take everything over all the time. That's an example. But also the people at the top, the people who are the team leader, project manager, what have you, or executive management. If they can't check their ego at the door and they can't put up with people down below who, get loud or start... I'm picturing a couple people I'll talk about in a moment when I mention this. If they can't handle that, then they are the ones with the problem. And you need to evaluate, again, this goes all the way up to corporate management. For some reason, people seem to think that, well, once corporate management is set, the team down below is where you have to start, cleaning house if things aren't going well. Well, you got to start looking at the executives. Okay, they have to leave their egos at the door, and unfortunately it's very difficult for many of them to do that. And that's why you have so much mediocrity in teams, and as we'll see, fake teams, just groups of people that are called teams, but they're not. You also have to have, I kind of mentioned this before, ever-improving skills, talents, abilities. If the people on the team are not constantly improving, now, I mean, there's limits to that. If you're looking at an assembly line, there's a certain level you need to get to. You can have an assembly line that runs like a Swiss watch. It's just running perfectly smoothly. In theory, to maintain that, yes, the people do not need, there isn't really any improvement necessary. But they should improve nonetheless. The goals of an assembly line are going to change. They're going to change processes. They're going to change the products that they're making. Things will change over the course of that business. And if you want to keep that wonderful team you have on the assembly line employed throughout their whole lives, ideally. I do not like the way these companies downsize and the way they shut people down and they just send them packing. This is one of the worst things that has happened to this country in recent decades. If you have a good assembly line team, for example, and you want to you want to be able to benefit from that wonderful team you've established, whether your product line goes in this direction or that direction, or technology sends you off in this direction. You want that same group who is established as a great team to be able to go in any of those directions. Well, that means they have to keep growing, they have to keep learning, they have to keep improving their skills and their talents throughout their tenure with the company. And now I've already mentioned this. You're going to need a leader. Depending on the makeup of the team, it may be a part of the team or it may be kind of an outsider who's overseeing it. But you have team leaders, you have coaches, obviously in sports, you have coaches. If you have an Olympic team that's preparing to go to the Olympics, they're going to have a coach. In the military, you're going to have, a hierarchy, generals and, lieutenants, all through that hierarchy. Project managers are specific kinds of leaders. They have certain training in something called project management. It's very important. A good project manager is a huge benefit to a company. I really like project management. I find that fascinating. So if we look at the drum and bugle corps again, so if you have an open class corps that's 128 people, they're all under or 21 years or under. You age out when you turn 21. You can't march anymore. So they're pretty young. They're usually around 16 to 19. And then the ones that stay until they're 21. Well, what kind of leaders do you have in there? You have a horn section. You have the drum section. You have the stationary drums in the front, the xylophones and everything. That's called the pit. And then you have the color guard, running around with the flags and the rifles and doing all the choreographed special effects. Well, what's the leadership in those groups? Well, you have the drum corps director. You have each section has their own instructors, and there's usually a lead instructor. And then if you break it down even further to drums, they might have a leader for, or I'm sorry, a instruction leader for snare drums, another one for the quads, those 4 or 5 drums that they're wearing, another one for the bass drums. I don't know if they'd have one dedicated for the cymbals, but cymbals are always neglected. It's a shame. Cymbals contribute an awful lot. Hey! But you have those instructional leaders. Then one of the persons in each of those groups, one of the snare drummers is the snare leader in the center of it. One of the quad players, or quints, whatever they're playing, the tom-toms, if you call it that, they're one of those is the leader. And then the corps overall also has the drum major, who is the leader. They're the ones up there directing the corps. And when they're on the field, when they're in uniform, a good drum major is going to command that corps. Okay, and it might be an 18-year-old kid, a 17-year-old kid. But if they call attention, all 128 of those people should instantly go to attention. They should listen to that drum major. And once you get all that leadership in place, you have all these different kinds of teams at different levels within the drum corps. But and again, you're going to hear me talk about drum corps a lot. There is nothing I've seen that even resembles a drum. In fact, I forgot to look it up. I knew I'd forget this. There was a quote, I think it was from Bobby Knight, right? And if I remember right, wasn't he Indiana basketball team? And I think it was Bobby Knight, but it was someone like that who said that if basketball teams went through as much training and put in as much effort as a drum and bugle corps does, they would be, all Olympic quality. And again, these are 16 to 21-year-old kids, basically, in these drum and bugle corps, and they're not paid for it. They have to pay to do it, to take that kind of abuse, to go through that. The athleticism involved, the hard work that these kids put in when they're paying for it, not getting paid, is unbelievable. Again, I can't say enough good things about drum and bugle corps. Another thing you have to have in a team, you have to come up with a common understood language. There's usually esoteric terminology, and everyone needs to understand that. That facilitates smooth communication. And it's not that you're trying to be cool and come up with your own language. It's that, whatever it is you're doing has its own terminology. If you're in a drum line, if you start doing this right, left, right, right, left thing, instead of going right, left, right, left. So if you start going right, left, right, left, you've got to call that something. So we call it a paradiddle. It's a drum rudiment. That kind of thing. Well, you call it a paradiddle, and all the drummers know what we're talking about when we say paradiddle. But then you go out into the rest of the world, and no one knows what a paradiddle is. Well, you have to have that, and you have to be able to communicate those kinds of things. Well, I've already talked about this, but I put in socialization. Again, you know, you're going to have people with different temperaments, social butterflies and shy people, but within the team, they should be able to socialize well with each other. A team does literally become like friends. And if you have a great team, you really come to love and care about these people, even if they're your coworkers and you don't see them outside of work. But when you're at work, when you're in the function of this team, those people mean something special to you that other people just don't mean. And it's just the way it is. It's just like with those people coming together from all walks of life to join the military in World War II. And they go out and they form unit and special forces, and they go over to you know, the Pacific Theater in particular. Look at what happened to Iwo Jima. I mean, these people learn to really care about each other. And yeah, it's a shame we can't all do that all the time with everybody around us, because in the big picture, we're all in the same boat on this planet, right? But that's one reason I love teams, is that teams do bring people together in ways that we really should come together all the time, but we don't. And that's why it's so beautiful when they do come together so well. Another thing with teams is that when you have these goals, you're going to have short range and intermediate and long-term goals. When you meet these goals, when you successfully complete these goals, you really have to have some kind of celebration. You know, maybe awards or rewards for people in the team, but more important, you just have to let off steam and you have to party. You have to celebrate it somehow. And it's incomprehensible to me that any team could work so hard toward any goal, and then when it's over, it's just, oh, that was fun. You know, that's incomprehensible to me. If you want those people in that team to go on and join other teams, or to take that team even further in the future, they've got to get some kind of recognition for what they've done and what they've accomplished. They have to have some kind of celebration or rewards. A truly functioning team is going to have loyalty. I mean real loyalty. Again, what I talked about before, where people come to think of each other as family. And go back to drum and bugle corps. I mean, you work with a drum corps learning an 11-minute show over the course of a whole year, and then, you know, for 3 months throughout the summer, you're traveling around in these buses. You have to wake up and get out and push your buses all the time, because they're usually not the best. You're sleeping on gym floors together. Back when I was in it, again, political correctness hadn't destroyed everything back then. I mean, the guys and the girls basically would use the same bathrooms. You know, we just didn't think anything of it. It was, I mean, it wasn't quite that extreme, but they could end up using the same bathrooms, and it just wasn't a big deal. You know, we were in this together. We became friends. We became brothers and sisters. I mean, we would protect and defend each other. It was just beautiful. And that generates loyalty to the group. Not loyalty in the sense that I have joined the Nazi Party. Not that kind of thing. You know, I have joined the Democratic Party. The Republican Party. Not that kind of nonsense. That isn't teamwork. That's cult. That's where you get a cult. You know, loyalty is the real deal. You really, truly care about these people, and you have a special affinity for whatever it is that your team is. You know, the football team. I'm trying to think of a football team. I don't watch football. 49ers, right? That's San Francisco. I think that's football. So 49ers, they've got loyalty toward that. Now, I'm going to talk about that in a minute. There's a big problem when it comes to professional sports. Another reason I usually don't use them when it comes to teamwork. But with drum and bugle corps, for example, like my favorite, Santa Clara Vanguard. Sorry to all the others out there. I do love Santa Clara, but there's other great corps I also thoroughly enjoy for different reasons. They are proud to be a member of Santa Clara Vanguard, or the Phantom Regiment, or the Cavaliers. or the old Velvet Knights. They're proud. They wear that badge with honor for the rest of their life. Just like a military unit is going to have so much pride in their. I was a member of the 101st Airborne, I think, is that famous division, right? And you're going to be extremely proud of that, and you're going to be extremely loyal to it. And I'll just kind of venture off right now. The problem you have with professional sports is that they are being paid to be in those teams, and the goal really doesn't matter. Does it really matter if the 49ers win the Super Bowl? Does it matter in the big scheme of things? Doesn't mean anything. Does it matter if they return those men safely from the moon? Yeah, it matters. In professional sports, people will leave their teams and go to a whole nother. They might end up on the team in the first place when they grew up in another part of the country. They'll stay there for 5 years, then they get a sweeter deal from some other team in another part of the country, and they go over there. I don't even see those as teams. That's one reason I don't like using sports, even though in terms of what they do on the field or on the basketball floor is in fact extraordinary teamwork. They are not producing the real kind of loyalty, because they will bail out. They will leave that city, and all these fans are out there wearing these jerseys with somebody's name on it, and that person will just abandon that city in a heartbeat if they're offered more money somewhere else. That kind of loyalty just isn't there. I see it much more in college teams, because the college is something personal to them. It matters to them. This will be their alma mater. It has real world loyalty there. So you want that kind of loyalty. If you let's see, how about some aerospace companies? Boeing and what's the other one? Well, Airbus is in France, I think. So let's say you work for Boeing and you're loyal to Boeing. What's it going to take to pull you over to Airbus? Well, if you have truly outstanding, extraordinary, world-class teams at Boeing, nothing's going to pull those people to Airbus. Nothing. All right, another thing that goes along with that, you have to have trust in a team. And I don't mean blind trust, I mean well-founded trust that has developed over time because people have proven that they can trust each other. Now, people will make mistakes and things. They might violate trust here, and then they're truly contrite about it. But those are just things you learn as you learn how to be a team. But you have to be able to trust the other people in your team. If they all have designated duties, you have to be able to trust them to do those duties on schedule, on budget. You have to, if they can't for some reason, they're going to communicate it in a timely manner. You have to trust people to be able to do their jobs, and that they care enough about that goal, about that bullseye, that they care as much about it as you do. And when anything infiltrates a team where people stop trusting each other, you've got a big, big problem. Your team is at stake. And I mentioned this before too, but I put in here, when a team gets together, even in the workplace of all places, when a team gets together, they're really excited to see each other. They're excited to be together. And it doesn't mean that outside of work they're going to socialize with each other, but again, in the context of what they're doing, they go to work and then they start working on this project, and they're anxious to go to a team meeting. They're anxious to it, not just for socializing or anything. They like working with this group. They really enjoy it. They see the competence and they see the potential. They see the accomplishment, and they know that it's going to make them work at their very best as well. They're excited about it. And if you don't have that kind of excitement, you really don't have a world-class team. They are very much like friends. Now, friends who are only worried about work, in this case, if you're in the business world, but, look at how many families there are that are not like that. It's the holidays right now. We just had Thanksgiving, Christmas is coming up. There's an awful lot of people who are dreading getting together with their families over the holidays. It's something they have to do and they don't want to do it. That's a sign something's wrong. And you don't want a team that's like that, where it's like, oh no, I have to go to the team meeting. Oh goodness. You don't want that. That's not a good team. That's not a world-class team. Everybody on that team should just be excited about getting together, even though they have to, be maybe be apart and do their own functions throughout much of the time. When they do get together, they should be excited about it, and that's a good indicator of how strong your team really is. Now, the last thing I'm going to list out here in terms of defining what a real team is, let me just say it, because it's not really a attribute of a team, it's something about teams. Valuable members of a team are not just let go or reassigned, or in this case of sports, traded away with no fanfare, no acknowledgement of what they've done, and not even saying goodbye, farewell. And it's not to say that on occasion you won't have people who leave a team or who are forced to leave a team, maybe because for good reasons, because they're reassigned to another team where they're going to be so valuable over there. That's probably the best case scenario. What I'm getting at goes back to what I said with pro sports. You know, I don't understand how people can have any loyalty to a pro sports team, because I mean, in a heartbeat, the team itself might trade their players off to some other team. I mean, what are you being loyal to? It's always in flux, it's always changing, there's always the risk that one of them's going to be fired or traded off or what have you, or that they'll just leave on their own for more money in some other city. I don't understand what it is you're being loyal to. There's nothing there to be loyal to. They're certainly not loyal to you. I mean, they'll send these team members packing all the time. But again, I don't want to be on sports because I don't know enough about sports. But I will say, like, you know, the two companies I was with the biggest jobs I had that I talked about in the introduction, they were awesome. They were great jobs. They both created job titles just for me, for the most part, you know, kind of tweaking what was already there. But they created job positions just for me to utilize my functions, and then I got to work with these wonderful teams. Now, it turns out in both cases, the first one, the company, the owners of this company made a deal with the devil. They joined forces with Goldman Sachs. And if you know what that's like, you have an idea of what happened. Goldman Sachs basically takes the thing over, and then they just run the people who built this business out. That's what Goldman Sachs does, for the most part. Sorry if you don't like hearing that, but I'm here to talk about the real world. Okay, that's why they get so much, shall we say, unpleasant things said about Goldman Sachs. Well, one of the first things they did was they just looked on paper without looking at the real world. Goldman Sachs doesn't care about the real world. They looked on paper and they said, well, this department can go, and there goes my department, the one I was head of, revenue management. Now, nobody wanted that. Nobody wanted me to go. But because they made this deal with the devil, somebody in some other state who hadn't met me or had the foggiest idea what we did just decided to get rid of me. You know, now the bad part is that the owners of the company, who were also in another city, and I didn't have a whole lot of contact with them, I just walked into work one day after all these years, and they just said, you're out of here, your department's gone. I had no goodbye party. I had no chance to say goodbye to anybody. I had no chance to even assimilate the idea of not working here anymore. And yet all the people I work with didn't want me to go. You know what I mean? Now, the question is, what does that do to the whole concept of teamwork in that company when people observe that happening to me? I'm just turned around at the door. I just come in like any other day after, I can't remember how many years I worked there. And I'm just turned around at the door and sent home with boxes of stuff in my car. What does that tell everyone else in that company? You know, and there were a lot of people, right? I mean, a lot. You know, all the managers I worked with around the country, all because of the decision of some owners who were the very least involved in our daily operations. What did they do? They sent a signal to all those other people that you are absolutely worthless to this company. You can work as hard as you want. You can accomplish as much as you're able to. You can do things like I did that enhance the revenues and make the owners tons of money, and they will just send you packing without any advance notice. You won't even have a chance to say goodbye to the people you work with. How is that going to inspire and motivate anyone in that company when they observe that kind of thing going on? And that's what I'm getting at. The second company I worked at, the big one, the medical device company, they did the same thing. They brought in a new president. He came in and ran a purge. On paper, he had a list of names, not really names, but job titles and such, and including mine. And he just gets rid of them. This is my show. I'm running this show. All these people, including me, who, again, I'm sitting here at performance evaluations with people saying, well, Paul's one of the hidden gems. He's one of the most important people in this company. Well, there were hundreds, 600 people in our area, thousands across the world. And in all humility, I think they were right. I was, not the most, but I was one of the very important people there. I wasn't just an average worker. I was an extraordinary worker. And, people didn't want to see me go. It's the same story all over again. All because some guy on paper, and he did it to all these people. All these people just come into work one day and without any advance warning, just turned around, here's a box of your stuff, bye-bye, see ya, sayonara. Don't even get to say goodbye to people. I didn't even get to gather all the phone numbers. I knew people all around the world that I dealt with on the phone. I considered them my friends because we did form extraordinary teams. What does that tell all those people in that company about their value? What's their real value? So you don't have, what I'm getting at is that you do not have a real team, if that's even possible. That someone who, is valuable and in good standing can just be turned around because some decision was made somewhere by somebody who doesn't even really have any idea what you're doing or the value of it. And you're just sent packing. Everyone's observing that happening to me and all these other people who lost their jobs on that day. What is their motivation to have any loyalty to that company? There is none. There's none. Again, I've said it before, and this president who came in, when he did that, and when he hired the out-of-state a consulting firm to come in and tell him how his own company ran rather than going out and talking to the people who actually work for that company. When he did these kinds of things, he should have been turned around and he should have been escorted out the door. And without any advance notice or any fanfare or being able to say goodbye. He's the one who should have been escorted to the door. And the reason is because he was a failure. You don't take all these people who are successes in these teams and send them packing. You take someone like that and you send them packing. This company I worked for previously that did the deal with Goldman Sachs, it's a shame that the people who own the business didn't know who they were dealing with. I tried to warn them, but nobody wants to listen sometimes. You make a deal with Goldman Sachs and you might as well kiss your life's work goodbye, because that's what Goldman Sachs does. You tell me what Goldman Sachs' product is or what their service is. There is none. They go in and they take over what the hard sweat and labor, blood, sweat, and tears of other people, and they just convert it into cash. That's what they do. I don't know what the purpose of Goldman Sachs is. It's I mean, it's the shark in our economy. All right, so I just want to make that point that you can identify whether or not a real team exists. I mean, can you imagine when the Chicago Bulls, right, basketball team, Chicago Bulls are in full swing. They've got Michael Jordan. I'm so sorry to the other players. I'm not. I respect your skills. I just don't know much about basketball. But as I recall, they had quite a few really well-known good players in that era. Can you imagine if one day one of those players, whether it's Michael Jordan or one of the others, just comes in and that for some decision made somewhere, this person's just sent packing? Now, they might be sent out with millions of dollars, but the fact is, how is everyone on that team going to feel about their true, real value as a member of that team? They'll never be able to trust that organization again, ever. And can you imagine how many companies have done that to their teams? That's why we do not have the extraordinary teams in corporate America that we used to have. It's one of the big reasons for it. Okay, now, so ultimately when you're dealing with a true team, the extraordinary world-class teams, it's about the interactions between the team members. It's about their skills, it's about how they interact with each other, how they help each other, they assist each other, they compensate for each other, and they cover for each other, not in the sense of covering up, but they have enough broad knowledge that if one person isn't able to get something done, someone else can step in and help them, that kind of thing. And that, for that to happen, that implies that everyone on the team has a very broad knowledge. So, for example, the teams where we were making these medical devices, you had engineering, you had marketing, you had representatives of all different kinds of things: supply chain, manufacturing. In my case, I represented data management, document control, regulatory affairs. But then they had a dedicated regulatory affairs person who was a specialist in regulatory affairs, which I was not. And you had all these people on the team. They had to have a broad understanding of what was going on for them to be effective individually and as members of the team. So, for example, the regulatory affairs specialist who knew far more about government regulation than anyone else in that room, and yet the people in that room knew something about government regulation. Why would an engineer know that? It's not really any of their business. The reason is because that's what a good team does. They gather this broad knowledge of all these other departments. The regulatory affairs specialist had some comprehension of how the manufacturing floor worked in all its aspects. Not in detail. They couldn't go in there and run the floor, but they understood something about it, and they understood how supply chain worked in the basic fundamentals. And it's that broad knowledge of everyone in the team which made them so effective, because when they do things and make decisions and make proposals and suggestions, it takes into account how that would affect these other departments because they have some kind of knowledge of it. And if you don't have that, if the regulatory affairs person only knew regulations and supply chain only knew supply chain, and the head of the manufacturing floor only knew manufacturing, and nothing else. They knew nothing. They had no concept of regulations. They had no concept of supply chain. You've got a team that's got a real uphill battle at that point. So a competent team's really going to understand, again, the quarterback, if the quarterback doesn't understand what life is like for the receiver, and if the receiver doesn't understand what life is like for the quarterback, they're not going to work together as well and as effectively as if they do have some understanding of it. That's what I'm getting at. So I mentioned before, I was kind of alluding to people who were, I don't want to say disruptive, but loud and boisterous, and this is just an issue that teams always deal with, is personalities. I'm thinking back to, we would have meetings on designing medical devices with all the departments in there, and one or two of the people on the team was in a different state. Everyone else was present in the room. And I remember there was one woman in particular in Massachusetts, and she would call in, and you would have, maybe 30 people in this room, in this meeting room. We're having a meeting, and this one woman who couldn't even see us, she's on the phone, she would start talking and then just talk and talk and talk and take the whole meeting over. And she would talk for, really until somebody just yelled into the phone and stopped her. And the sad thing is, she was very competent at her particular function, and what she was saying was really spot on. This was things that was worth saying. Now, she was a little long-winded about it, but she wasn't going off on a tangent. Now, we had other people who might be in the room, and they would just go off on a total tangent. Okay, and that's a problem when that happens. They're getting distracted, they're going off on something that's personally important to them, they're losing sight of the team. This woman in Massachusetts, though, she didn't say anything that was not useful for the team. She just kind of lacked that capacity to really package it up into a nice little box with a bow and hand it to us. And she wasn't respectful of the fact, she wasn't empathizing with us while she's talking into her phone, realizing that there's 30 people in a room just going, I can't believe she won't shut up. So that's kind of what I was getting at. It wasn't that anyone on that team was necessarily bad or bad for the team, but that's where a team leader needs to kind of put the hammer down and guide these people. So here's an example of where this woman in Massachusetts could grow and increase her competence and her skill. With proper leadership who talks to her tactfully about that, and let her know what you're saying is spot on. We need to hear this. That's fine. But I want you to understand that in the meeting room that we have all these people here who each have something important to say, and you took up about 4/5 of the time of the meeting from a phone, and you can't even evaluate people's responses. And, if you do that tactfully, she could learn how to tighten up what she's saying. And then you keep that team member, which you want to do, because she was really good. And I enjoyed working with her a lot. You know, so you can kind of see how there's all these different things you can do. When I was at this company in San Diego, where I was revenue manager for this portfolio, which was all around the country, so I would get sent out, every couple weeks. I would get sent out to another city, and I would meet with the business. But most of the time throughout the day, I had come up with my own regimen, my own schedule, and I scheduled all the managers. I would call them every week, and we would have revenue meetings. Now, when we had those meetings or when we had conferences, I would introduce them to the language that I wanted to use, the esoteric language for revenue management. And by having those weekly meetings, they would become accustomed to this language and the way that I looked at things, the algorithms, the way I analyzed things, and what the expectations were. I had my checklists and things like that, have you check the competition. And through repetition, what happened was the people would assimilate what I was doing, and they would start using this language. They would start, well, of course I told them to, but they would start using these checklists, and they would start using the algorithms. But at the same time, and this is where I had to leave my ego at the door, I had to be open enough where if they felt like something could use improvement or that I was doing something that was wasting time, they had to be able to tell me that, and I had to be able to listen to what they were saying and evaluate that fairly without an ego. Again, the goal of the group, of the team, was what was most important. And I let them do that, and I encouraged them to do that. And, some managers were more willing to voice their concerns than others, but I appreciated it very much, and that made for a very strong team. But what you ended up with were managers who, once they had that language and they had a concept of how revenue management worked, because there was no revenue management before I came in, then they could start talking to each other when I'm not even there. And you know what? They could get something done. And the reason is because as a team, we had come up with these common goals, common language, common understanding of what the algorithms were, and we were all, ideally we were all able to leave our ego out of it enough to where over time we modified and changed things, and we were willing to let things go or to bring something new in. And then as a group, even if it's not the whole group, or even with me as the leader in this case, two managers could talk to each other and accomplish an awful lot toward revenue management. And to me, that was a great team. I thoroughly enjoyed that team. And it's not to say there wasn't a lot of diversity in terms of managers' temperaments and the way they looked at things. I mean, there were a couple that were pretty frustrating, to be honest. But it wasn't the perfect team in that sense, but it was a very, very good team. I was very proud of it, and it could have been done different. I've seen other groups, other companies that establish a revenue management regimen like this without doing it the way I did it, and it doesn't work out nearly as well. Likewise, at this medical device company, I mean, for all the problems they had with some of the management there, which is what really tore everything apart. I mean, for the most part, for a company that size, there were just a lot of really good running teams there. Very, very impressive. And it's amazing how really the only part that wasn't good were those pockets of management. There was some lower management here in Minnesota. They brought in some Minnesotans to run it, and Minnesotans just have a different way of doing things, It's very much about them. There's a lot of narcissism there, and they really mangled everything. Then we brought in this president, and this guy really had no business running a company based on what I saw. And it really just damaged everything. And it's a shame because they had so much worldwide that was running really efficiently. The teams were very good at working together, very respectful of each other. They wouldn't break those rules like I had in here, But overall, that company was really, really good, and it's just a shame that such really a handful of managers, just dismantled everything. I mean, I just found out the other day that yet another of their very most valuable people finally just said, "I can't take it anymore," and she left. And that company's losing all the. I mean, how could they have loyalty? How could she have loyalty when she sees what they did to me? It's things like that, and she just wanted to get out of there. And I mean, this company, if they'd had a better president, this company could have just dominated the industry. I have no doubt about it. But now they've lost so many people because of that. I don't know. But anyway, let's see here. Another thing about a good, competent, world-class team, and this may not apply in every case, but in many cases, if you want the team to survive over time, to endure, people do come and go, if only because they die, they retire. To have a continuity of a team that is really good. Another reason I like Santa Clara Vanguard and Drum and Bugle Corps, I first encountered them when I started marching in 1987. They did a Russian Christmas music show. It still brings me to tears when I watch that show. Unbelievable. And yet they're always serious contenders for the world finals every single year. And there's other corps that come in, they almost get to the top, and then they fade out, and they might even end up disbanding. What is it about Santa Clara that has this ability to endure? And other corps like the Blue Devils, the Cadets, they used to be called Garfield Cadets, Cavaliers. The top 10 of drum corps usually consists of at least the same maybe 6 corps that have just been there for decades. And why is that? When the other corps come in and out, and they put on extraordinary shows, all of them. But there's something about the overall management, and it's not just the management of the corps, it gets into community support and other things, funding, maybe corporate sponsorship and things. But what is it that makes some of these teams they're always in the finals? They're always in the finals. I mean, I don't know if it's still that way now, but back in the 80s, 90s, I think, there were some college teams in the Big Ten, or not the Big Ten, but, college basketball, they were just always in the finals. They almost always made it to the Final Four or were contenders, like Kansas, University of Kansas, and I'm trying to think, North Carolina. I can't remember now, but, what is it about those teams that they're always contenders, while others they bust in and then they fall out? What is it about that? Because you have different people. Obviously, like University of Kansas, after 4 years, you've got new people, a whole new team. Well, it goes back to the team leaders, the coaches. It goes back to the community support, the institutional support for it. And they all have to have an understanding of what they're trying to accomplish with these teams that will endure over time as world-class, extraordinary teams. And they have to have that as one of their goals, is to maintain that endurance of these extraordinary teams. And all too often companies look at teams as little pockets. They're like, they're like novas in the sky. They come in, they get bright, and then they're gone. And they don't look at it over the long haul, like this president of this company who came in and ran this purge on paper. Just a foolish move, absolutely foolish. He devastated all those teams. There was no continuity. There was no endurance of those teams because he did something like that. And the thing is, what you can do is mentorship. You can bring in, it's kind of like understudies when you get into, Broadway plays and such. You always have an understudy ready in case the lead gets hit by a bus or breaks their leg. Break a leg, in case that happens. You have an understudy who's ready to come in. But also, by bringing in trainees, there's always someone ready to come in who's prepared for the way that team functions. And that's what, like a lot of these drum corps, they have what they call junior corps. So they'll have a corps that's for even younger kids. I don't know how young, maybe even like 8, 9, 10 years old, really young, but they're just not ready to join the big leagues yet. But they're being prepared to do that by the same overall parent organization. And that's why a lot of these corps are so good. Other reasons, there might be other reasons, like I know Santa Clara goes out and recruits people all around the country. So, but there's going to be something in the institution, the overseeing institution, that is deliberately maintaining continuity and making sure that team is always extraordinary. So that, like at a university basketball team, you don't go oh, we've got the best team in the country this year, and then the next year it's not quite as good, and then the third year they're not even anywhere near the finals, and then the fourth year everyone's forgotten who they are. But then 6 years later, all of a sudden they're jumped back into the finals again. I mean, something's wrong. Something's wrong overall with the institution if that's what's going on. Unless you have every college basketball team, maintaining continuity well, in which case they always have to fight and duke it out. They're all going to be really good, in other words. Hopefully you understand what I'm getting at here, but in business and in corporations, one of the catastrophes that has come from downsizing and this willingness to just throw valuable employees out the doors and onto the streets, devastate their families. One of the consequences of this greed and this horrible management in terms of humanity, one of the problems, catastrophes coming about from human resources replacing personnel departments. These are the catastrophes we've dealt with, and one of them is that the whole concept of a team in corporate America almost has no meaning anymore. They keep using the word all the time, and that makes it even more insulting. They called our the groups I was member of teams all the time. They had signs on the wall, teams. They had little awards and trophies, teamwork. They had seminars on teamwork, which were painful to watch because they didn't have any idea what a team was. I mean, these people have clearly never been in a drum and bugle corps. They do not know what an extraordinary team is. And, but then they'd do things like let people go, or they would keep shifting people around between teams. They wouldn't even let them stay in the same team for any length of time. No idea of continuity, very little foresight. And they were destroying the concept of what a team is, even as they use the word team all the bloody time in these companies. So, if you think about it, think about brands. What was the difference between General Motors and Ford back in the heyday of cars, the 40s and the 50s? What was the essential difference? For the most part, when you had a job back then, you had the job for the rest of your life until you retired. Well, what does that mean? That means you have a certain group of people who become the Ford research and development, design and engineering team, and they stay there for the most part for the rest of their lives. And they train others to come in and replace them when the time comes for them to retire or die, but they're being trained in the Ford way, the Ford methodology, the Ford way of looking at the world. Meanwhile, General Motors is doing the same thing with their team. And those people feel very confident they're guaranteed a job for the rest of their life. Well, what do you end up with? You end up with Ford cars that have a unique identity, a unique brand. Not just the name, but the brand really represents something different. You know a Ford when you see it, when you drive it. And then General Motors, you know a GM vehicle when you see it, when you drive it. And look what's happened. I look out here now, I don't watch TV, so I don't see advertisements. And advertisements are where people learn what car they're supposed to drive. Because if they don't drive this, they won't be cool or whatever. NPR won't like them anymore. So I watch these cars over the years since I stopped watching TV, and it's amazing. You watch the trends of how the majority of vehicles change. And to me, they just all look alike. I call them clown cars. They're all just little stubby things. They look kind of like a SUV that got, shrunk-ized. Someone had a little laser gun that could shrink the SUV down a bit. And they all look exactly the same. I don't even know what the names of these things are, what the model number, the brands. I mean, I don't know what the models are. I honestly couldn't tell you the name. All these cars look alike to me. So you tell me, I mean, are they from General Motors? I don't know. Are they from Ford? I don't know. Are they from Lexus or Saturn still around? Are they from Japan? I don't know. Because I don't watch TV, I don't know what these brands are. I don't care about cars really. So as I watch over the last several years, as these cars have all kind of converged toward this same vehicle that looks like a little mini SUV, it looks like a cross between an egg and a clown car. I have no idea what the brand is. How did that happen? It happened because you have people being downsized out of this company, so then they end up working for their competitor, and then some of them just don't like what's going on, so they leave. And you've got people just moving from one company to the next. All the engineers and the designers, the idea people, the managers, they're just moving along from the auto industry from one company to another. There's no loyalty. There's no identity for the company because nobody has a job guaranteed for the rest of their lives. And what do you end up with? You end up with every car on the road looking exactly the same. And you know what? You probably do not see it that way. And the reason is because you watch television, don't you? I don't. Without television telling me what to think and what I'm supposed to purchase and what is supposed to be cool, I have to just base my opinion on what I see. And what I see are a bunch of cars that look absolutely ridiculous. I'd be embarrassed to drive one of those things. But if you're seeing that on television all the time, you're going to think, oh, geez, I got to get one of these hybrids. I got to get one of these, whatever they're called. I don't even know what these things are called. And it's amazing how much, but the point is, the reason all these cars look the same, and frankly probably just are the same, is because there's no loyalty, there's no team. There isn't a team at General Motors that is going they're out of college until the day they retire. They're with the same company and they feel very secure in that. And we're not getting that. Instead, we're getting what I described here, which is that they work for 5 years or 10 or 15 or 20 or 25, and then they come into work one day and they're turned around, given a box of their stuff, and said, see you later, pal. We're not even going to let you have a goodbye party. Hopefully you got the phone numbers of the people you've worked with the last 25 years, because otherwise you're not going to know how to get a hold of them. Bye. It's no wonder. I mean, what I'm getting at is that the concept of brand means absolutely nothing anymore. It's all rhetoric and propaganda, manipulation, public relations, I mean the unethical kind. It's all manipulation. It's all advertising. It's all image. A brand used to mean something. A Kelvinator refrigerator meant something. It meant something. But now, and I see this in music all the time too. I mean, you buy a Fender guitar or a Gibson guitar, Fender and Gibson used to mean something. But now, you buy a Fender, and that thing could have been made in South Korea, it could have been made in China. I mean, who knows? You have to research it every time to figure out where the thing was actually made. It doesn't mean what it used to mean. So instead of, these trade agreements have a lot to do with that. Instead of the American, in our economy, if you look at the supply and demand videos I talked about, how important it is that you maintain that stability and predictability in your economy. Well, when the free trade agreements opened up the rest of the world, most companies abandoned that, and they violated the law of supply and demand. They started shipping the jobs out to South Korea or Asia or wherever. And what do you get? The brand Fender means nothing anymore. Fender means that logo, and that's it. The Fender logo. Gibson means the Gibson logo. It doesn't mean the guitar, the quality of guitar it used to mean. You might get a good one, or you might not. Okay, and this all goes back to teamwork. Also, teamwork as a nation. If we as a nation educated our people properly so that they understood the law of supply and demand, as I explained it in my videos on that subject, everybody understood it competently and everyone acted on it responsibly, guess what? We wouldn't allow things like these trade agreements that let that happen. I mean, all these things are really tied together, and people just don't think about it. There's when I was in philosophy, there was a classic question. Imagine that you have a ship, a tall ship. If you replace one board in that ship at a time until you've replaced every board in the ship, the question is, when you're done doing that, do you have the same ship or not? Or think of it more like a canoe or something, so you're not dealing with masts, it's just the boards. You replace every board in that boat. Is it the same boat or not? And that's what we're dealing with in the corporate world today. We take these people, this team leader moves from GM to Ford, this master luthier moves from Fender to Gibson, and you start moving these things all around all the time. You still have something like a boat here called Fender and Gibson or General Motors and Ford, but is it the same thing it used to be? I mean, what I'm getting at is that there's nothing out there anymore. There's just a bunch of names and labels. And both in terms of the company names and the brands. And the reason is because we have lost sight of what real teamwork is. They got human resource departments instead of personnel departments. Think about it. Human resources. Human resources. Resources that are human. They may be consumed and disposed of just like any other resource. Office supplies. Personnel department was another story. A personnel department is concerned with you and your family's stability and security as you contribute to the company's security for the rest of your life. Human resources? Seriously? These free trade agreements, all these things combined and kind of conspired to really dismantle what this country once had in terms of business. And I guess the 2 points I want to make is, one, that you understand what I'm talking about here, and two, that you understand that in your business, you can start fixing this now. If you really understand what I'm talking about, you can start changing things at the business you're at the corporation you're at. And that's why I say this series is even valuable for corporate executives, if there's any responsible ones left. And I don't know if there are. Let me just list out quickly some what I consider to be extraordinary teams. And I'm not going to go in detail. I don't necessarily claim to know detail about some of these. I don't have personal experience. But we all know they're very good teams. I've mentioned before, military units, special forces. Okay, everything I mentioned about teams, the loyalty, the ability, I mean, they trust each other with their lives. Clearly, those are extraordinary teams, very well trained. And if someone defects from there, what are they called? They're called a traitor. And what do people think of them? Okay, you get a CEO today who defects. You get a basketball player making $50 million a year, and they leave one city to go to another. They're not called traitors. But you try that in the military. On the other hand, great sports teams are awesome teams in terms of the limited goal of winning this year's championship. If I'm going to look at sports teams, you know what? The team I'll look at the most in terms of teamwork that I really love are the Harlem Globetrotters. Look into the Harlem Globetrotters. I grew up with them. They were a great influence on me growing up. Meadowlark Lemon just passed away earlier this year. It's very sad. I just loved the Harlem Globetrotters. Now, you can say that they're doing tricks and that they're buffoons. No, they can probably beat any basketball team out there, even if they're not using those tricks. And the reason is because they understand teamwork. They understand it well. And I bet you they wear their jerseys with pride more than any other team out there. If you do go to television, in the 60s you had things like Gilligan's Island, the Munsters, the Addams Family. Those are ensembles, and you're getting into the arts here. But can you really imagine any other Gilligan? Can you imagine any other Herman Munster than Fred Gwynne? The Addams Family without Morticia. Oh, I had such a crush on her growing up. I mean, the thing is, these casts were perfect for each other. They worked so well with each other. And I'm not going to say there wasn't discord off camera. I don't know. But in terms of the goal of getting these shows on TV done extremely well, look how much they've passed the test of time. People are still watching them and buying these DVDs 40, 50 years later. Can you imagine someone else playing Gomez Addams other than John Astor? I mean, it's possible, but those were extraordinary teams. And when you might have a good TV show idea, and if you don't have the extraordinary team in place, it might go nowhere. Now contrast this with Bewitched. On Bewitched, for the first several years, they had, I believe it was Dick York was the original person, and he had an unfortunate problem, pain medication, addiction, and other issues. In the last season, they had to let him go. Now, back then, they didn't have the internet, so if you can believe it, they just replaced him with Dick Sargent, and they didn't even tell anybody. They never even acknowledged that they did it. They just did it. And most people never noticed because, there was no mass media, internet for people to say, oh my gosh, they replaced Dick York. I mean, the guys didn't even look that much alike. And yet most people, after watching Bewitched for 4 or 5 or 6 years, they didn't even realize it was a new person playing Darren. And But the reason Bewitched went that many years is because it was a great team. Dick York was great on that team. And as talented as Dick Sargent was, the fact is Dick Sargent did not have the same vibe. There was something fishy. Even though people didn't even realize it was a different person, the show quickly fell off the charts. And it's because Dick Sargent just didn't have that kind of passionate, affectionate vibe going that Dick York did. Dick York really looked like he loved Samantha. And in fact, I think Dick York had a crush on Elizabeth Montgomery in the background. That's probably part of it. Dick Sargent, it turns out, was gay. So, you know, he wasn't as comfortable portraying this kind of sincere affection for his wife. And it just, one season, it just plummeted. So there's where a team kind of fell apart because they replaced somebody who was valuable. Even though he had problems. He had the problems with the pain medication. But without him there, the team was gone. Drum and Bugle Corps, I mentioned before. I'm probably going to do an episode just talking about drum corps. It's such an extraordinary activity. In the Olympics, obviously, synchronized swimming, relays. I once got to sit in the... I worked in Salt Lake City during the 2002 Olympics. I got to sit in the American bobsled. And wow, I mean, these things are rickety. You would never believe looking at those things. And I was thin back then, especially. My nickname was the Skeleton, and I could barely fit in that thing. I could barely weasel myself into this thing. And I met the team, and the team were a bunch of like Nebraska farm boys, really nice guys, just great guys, but they're huge, big, muscular guys, and they can just run and jump one after another right into that thing and keep that thing moving smooth sailing. Incredible teamwork. Incredible teamwork. And they're trusting each other because you can get hurt or killed in those. All the things I listed on teamwork you'll find with that bobsled team or any other Olympic team. And again, Drum and Bugle Corps is Olympic quality. I think it supersedes it. Similarly, you know, dance troops, the Blue Man Group in Vegas, even Penn and Teller, if you're going to put, you know, just two people together, obviously, look at the teamwork there. Are you ever going to tell me that Penn doesn't trust Teller implicitly? That Teller does not trust Penn implicitly? Do you think either one of them thinks the other one's going to take off and leave to form his own, you know, group somewhere else? I mean, this is teamwork. River Dance, just a work of beauty. The original one I liked with Michael Flatley and Jean, I forget her last name, I'm so sorry, she's beautiful too, Simmons or Smart Jean, but the original one, you just watch those. Now contrast that though with line dancing at a bar. You go to a bar and you have all these people who really may not know each other, but they know the moves, so they go out and they do this country western line dancing. Visually they're doing the same thing basically, but is that really a team? You know, and it gets back to what with Mr. H pulling out a wand and saying the word teamwork. You know, just because we're both out there doing the same thing doesn't mean that anything that resembles a team exists. Excuse me. Clear my throat to finish this one. The Rat Pack. You know, Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, the awesome Sammy Davis Jr. I mean, just wow. Peter Lawford, all those. If you remember back in the early 60s, they had what they called the Summit, which is where they just basically did these Vegas shows. And the thing is, the Rat Pack, they played off each other real well, but if you watch the videos of the Summit, go to YouTube and look up the Summit, they weren't all that good. I mean, they lost track of what they were doing. They had a lot. They fell on their face with some of the jokes. And yet it was so entertaining overall. And the main reason is because they were all so cool and they were so good at being cool together. So in a way, I don't look at the Rat Pack as being as much of a team as other people might. But you know what? That's actually consistent with everything I just listed out in terms of teamwork, because they didn't train for that. They just kind of did it, fell into it. They didn't have all these features of a real team. They just worked together really well. So the Rat Pack was entertaining as a group, but I would not call that a team. And if you watch the Summit and you watch where they really made a lot of mistakes, and they would, like me right now, they couldn't think of what to say next, and you think of these guys as smooth talkers, but they weren't that smooth. Very entertaining to watch. I love them all, but you know, rock and roll bands, of course, are a classic You know, I've played in a couple bands, and again, there's just nothing like it. When you're on stage and you're playing, and all you have to do is look in the eyes of the other guitarist or the bass player, and you just know what you can telegraph to each other what you're trying to say, what you're going to do next, or what's going on. There's nothing like it. It's as if the three of, I like trios, it's as if the three of us are just one person. And we just, it's unlike anything else in the world. Awesome teamwork is amazing. Um, and you look at rock bands, you know, there's, to contrast that, look at the rock bands from the 70s, got real famous, you know, Foreigner, Little River Band, that kind of thing. And then, you know, next thing you know, 10 years later, they're doing state fairs. And you got these bands that they have no original members. You know, it's like a band that started 45 years ago, and everyone in the band is like, you know, 22 years old. Again, you know, there's no teamwork there. So what do you end up with? There's no team. There's nothing. There's no substance. All there is a brand. There's a name. Foreigner, Little River Band, Leonard Skinner. There's just a name, but there's nothing there. You know, I mean, it's the sad fact. Some people don't want to admit it, but when the plane crashed and all those people in Leonard Skinner were killed, the band was done. And they should have retired the name, and they should not have continued touring under that name, in my opinion, out of respect for the outstanding, extraordinary team that Leonard Skinner was before that disaster happened. And too often, you know, people see an opportunity to make money or something, and, you know, and for the surviving members, I understand why they would want to keep it going. I wouldn't be too hard on them, but you know where I'm going with that. Improv troupes, comedy improv troupes. Now, I love watching improv because some of them are just terrible, and frankly, I'm not very good at it. But it's a fascinating study. If you ever study how improv works, it's amazing to learn how people work as a team, reading each other and playing off each other, suggesting to each other. I mean, improv teams are really amazing. And, you know, I love the old SCTV. The Not Ready for Primetime Players, the original people who are on Saturday Night Live, and I can't even find anything funny on Saturday Night Live since then. You know, there was Joe Piscopo and Eddie Murphy. A couple came in afterwards who were just awesome, but the team was gone. This awesome team of the Not Ready for Primetime Players: John Belushi, Dan Aykroyd, Gilda Radner. You know, that group was just unbeatable, and that's an improv group. Another example would be Mad Magazine. When Mad Magazine first formed, I think in the 50s, and it was William Gaines, a big bearded guy, who I grew up on Mad Magazine. I loved it. It was so funny, and it taught me really about how absurd this world really was. I'm so grateful I read Mad Magazine when I was a kid. But Bill Gaines put together an amazing team. You know, he had, I can't pronounce his name, Sergio Argones, and Al Jaffe, you know, snappy answers to stupid questions, and now, of course, I can't remember the names, and I wish I could, but there were just these people who made these regular features in Mad Magazine, and you never knew anything about them, but by name you could associate it with what they did in the magazine, and Bill Gaines tied all this together. Now, I can't tell you, these people might have been at each other's throats, for all I know, but in terms of creating this magazine and making it extraordinary, he did it. And when Bill Gaines, I think he sold the thing before, he might have sold it to Time Warner or something before he passed away. But either way, you know, eventually Al Jaffe's gone, Dave Berg's gone, and when that happened, Mad Magazine just isn't what it once was. It isn't, to me, it isn't good anymore. And it's not that there isn't funny stuff in there, and I'm not trying to insult the artists who write for it. It lost that cohesive team feature that made Mad Magazine under Bill Gaines something absolutely extraordinary. You know, it was just magic. It was pure magic. And the last one I'd list as a great example of a team is, quite simply, a great marriage. When you have two people, when I see an old couple, they've been married 50, 60 years, and they're out there still holding hands walking down the street, man, I can't teach you anything about teamwork. Go ask them. That's what I mean when I say, wow. That's what I mean when I say that an extraordinary team is just a sight to behold. It's the best that humanity has to offer. It really is. And with that in mind, unfortunately, I have to break that vibe by taking a look at the truck wash. So the question is, how, since Mr. H came out and grabbed that wand and he said, teamwork, let's see, was that really teamwork? Because he seemed to think it was. Let's take a look. Teamwork involves clearly defined goals. We had no goals. We had no business plan. We had absolutely nothing. Listen to the introduction. You'll find that out. Clearly defined duties and responsibilities. Absolutely not. We had nothing written down. We had no job description. Mr. H would call us a manager on a whim just because he felt like it, without any managerial duties or title or pay. Nothing was clearly defined. We had no training. How about standard procedures? I've said all along in the introduction, we had no procedures at all. And when I was willing to write them, no one cared. Practice and rehearsal? Absolutely not. When I first started there, you know what I did? I learned so much in drum corps, it affected the rest of my life. When I got the wand out, I would kind of dance. I got a routine going to where I would just kind of swirl and move. And when I first started working there, the drivers would look at me and I mean, there was one time I remember like 5 drivers just staring at me through the window, and they're all just got these huge smiles on their face. They're just loving it. It was like I was putting on a show for them. It was beautiful, and it didn't take long for Mr. H to just completely slaughter that on the altar of how not to run a business. I mean, he just between his abuse and his complete lack of a desire to run that place in any efficient manner, I couldn't maintain that kind of joy in my work. I mean, I'm washing trucks, and yet I was out there just swirling, and I was just moving, musically, like it was choreographed. And it made it so much fun for me, and the drivers loved it. And it didn't last long because Mr. H just put a chokehold on everything with his complete inability and unwillingness to run his business properly. Practice and rehearsal. When did we ever do that? When did we ever do that? I asked frequently for us to, I brought this up all the time. If Jethro and I would train on how to, not spray each other across the truck, and we would work at opposite ends and move and know where the other person is. That way we can move quicker. One of us doesn't have to stand and wait while the other person's doing something so we don't spray them. If we practiced and rehearsed all this, we could get done so much quicker and more efficiently and do a better job. And nobody cared. Nobody had the slightest interest in doing that. How about evaluation? The only evaluation, there was no evaluation. You could do the worst job in the world. You could do nothing. You could just distract the driver and do absolutely nothing, and the driver drives out in the same truck that not even wet. I mean, we didn't do this, but you could do that in theory. And Mr. H would not punish anyone for that, as long as the driver didn't complain and as long as he got paid. There was no evaluation. The only thing that came close to an evaluation was the way that Mr. H kept getting on my case for, quote, taking too long. Even though I wasn't, I was only taking as long as it takes to do a good job. The other guys just didn't take any time at all. So there's no evaluation. So far I'm on number 5. None of them are met at this truck wash. Can you see why that's the example of how not to do business in terms of teamwork? Scheduling. I've said all along there was no scheduling there. I mean, he would just want to send, the first hour of the day we have little business, so he wants to send someone home early, and then for the next 6 or 7 hours we're packed and we're understaffed. There was no such thing as scheduling there. It was just totally ad hoc off Mr. H's head. It just made no sense. Communications. There was no communication at all. I give abundant examples in the introduction. There just wasn't any. I mean, they could put a chemical in a bottle that I'm used to using for like a sanitizer deodorizer. They could put some totally different chemical in there and nobody even tells me. So I go out and I spray some random chemical all over a truck because no one bothered to tell me that. Now, remember when the water would shut off? I'd go out and start washing trucks and the water just disappears, and I have to sit there in front of a driver really embarrassed saying, I don't know how to turn the water on in this truck wash. And the reason's because Mr. H went and messed with something over the weekend, and he didn't bother telling anybody that we have to pull a certain handle to get the water running. No communication whatsoever. You have to leave your egos at the door in a good team. Mr. H, the whole thing, half of our job was servicing his ego. His ego was the business. Listen to the introduction. Ever improving skills and talent. The only person who kept learning and growing and improving there to the bitter end was me. No one else cared about that. They couldn't have cared less. Jethro thought he knew it all. He'd been there 6 years. Mr. H told me he knew it all. When I suggested to him that he go out and wash a truck because I thought that he should use our equipment and our space and understand what it's like for us, he said, I don't need to know that. I already know how to wash trucks. I'd seen him wash maybe 3 trucks in the entire time I was there. You know, no interest in improving your skills or your talent. None. How about team leaders? There wasn't any. There was no leadership there of any kind. There was an owner who came in once in a while. When he did, he turned the place into just a chaotic tornado wreck. It's like a trailer park after a tornado. Jethro fancied himself the manager, but he didn't have the title, he didn't have the pay, he didn't have the managerial responsibilities in particular. He certainly didn't have the knowledge. There was no leadership at all there. Common language, esoteric terminology. Okay, I'll give you that one. We did have our terminology, but again, because I had no training, I was learning that terminology all the way up until the end, after being there almost 8 months. I was still learning new terms, because no one had ever told it to me before. I guess if you're there 6 years, like Jethro, yeah, you're going to pick that up. I should have known that in the first couple weeks. It should have been in my training, procedures, things like that, which we had no procedures. How about rewards, party, celebration upon successful completion? Does getting paid late almost every time, does that count as a reward? Mr. H, the only thing that came close to that is Mr. H did give Jethro and I a bonus after we spent those about 3 weeks of working without nonstop after the guy in the summer left. We worked about 3 weeks, and we were working every day, and most of the days it was extremely busy, so we didn't even get a break or a lunch. It was just 8 hours of pure work, and it was really wearing us out and killing us. He did give us a bonus. I think the reason he did it, though, was for another reason. He was a little worried about what we might do to try to get compensation for the 5 weeks that we shut down and had half pay without any advance warning, the thing that took me away from my plan to get out of homelessness. I think that's the main reason, but either way, even if you look at it as a generous gesture, like everything else, he did it wrong, and because he did it wrong, not only did we hardly get any of that bonus, but come tax time, we're going to pay a big price for it. He did it completely wrong. I would have been better off if he had not given us that bonus, because he did it wrong, like everything else. He just didn't understand. How about loyalty? Well, Jethro's out looking for another job. Every other employee, they're just, the customers can't stand the I mean, there's no such thing as loyalty at that truck wash. Leave it at that. Listen to the introduction. How about trust? How do I trust a guy who tells me he's watching me sleep from home over surveillance cameras? How am I supposed to trust that guy? The guy lied all the time. Jethro didn't bother showing up all the time. Meanwhile, Jethro's trying to get me in trouble, I think, just because he's jealous, because I'm competent. You know, that's just kind of petty politics. You know, again, Jethro wasn't well educated. He wasn't a professional. That kind of backbiting is what people like that do. There was no trust there. The only person they could trust was me. I mean, because that's how I am. I am professional. My pride, my self-worth is based on my reliability. You know, if I say I'm going to be there at a time, I'll be there. Mr. H would always say, oh, I'll be in at 7 in the morning, and he wouldn't show up till 8:30, 9, 2 in the afternoon. Who knows? How do you have any trust in that situation? Excited about getting together? Are you kidding me? I would just hear that toward the end, when I just heard that Mr. H was going to be in the next day, then I would start shaking. My body, I'd start twitching, my heart would start pounding, and I was just sweating bullets. I have recordings of me that I would record like a half hour before I went into work. I would go to Walmart and get some bananas or something, and you can hear it in my voice. It's just shaking, and I'm just like, I don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to be near this guy again. This guy's crazy. I don't want to be near this guy. You call that being excited about going in to be with your team? Not even close. And then valuable members just let go or reassigned with no fanfare or acknowledgement. That's how not to run a team. Well, what happened? I couldn't take anymore, and in the end, I ended up, having a nervous breakdown, basically, of a panic attack. And I told Mr. H, "This is it. You're not going to abuse me anymore. You got my 2 weeks' notice. I promised you 2 weeks. You got it. 2 weeks from now, I'm gone." What did he do? The next business day in the morning, because I'm the first one there, right? I'm the one who's reliable, shows up on time. He fires me instead of letting me work out those 2 weeks, which I really could have used right about now, where I have no money and no food while the temperature's plummeting. He just fires me, sends me packing. Jethro didn't know anything about it. How valuable was I there, and what did Jethro learn from that experience about how valuable he is to Mr. H? That's the whole list right there of everything I had on what an extraordinary team is. The only thing that Mr. H might have, well, and even there, the only thing Mr. H met was the one time he gave us that bonus. But all the other times we did extraordinary things, or I would do extraordinary things, and we might accomplish something, he didn't reward us at all then. And when he did it here, he seemed to have done it for another reason, for a self-serving reason, because he's worried about us getting compensation for the 5-week shutdown, and he did it wrong. He ended up costing us money with a bonus. Everything on this list, Mr. H did wrong. That truck wash was an example of how not to do business. And yet he had the audacity to come out there to me, someone who's been in Drum and Bugle Corps, who formed this extraordinary team with this company in California where I was revenue manager nationally. Someone who's been a part of these extraordinary engineering teams we had with this medical device company. I know what a team is. And he has the audacity to come out there, grab a wand, for the first time really I'd seen him since I got there, and just say the word teamwork with a smile on his face. Sorry, folks. Fail. Yet another reason why that truck wash is doomed to absolute failure. That is how not to do business. So with that, I think I finally get to close this notes. And I'm just going to ask you, if you really comprehended what I was getting at in this video, you might want to watch this one a second time, because I packed an awful lot in here. Teamwork is something that is just utterly ignored today, and it used to be the foundation of the greatness of our society. And teamwork has become a joke. It's become a mere brand. It's the name Fender rather than the quality instrument that was made by Fender. It's become a slogan on a wall that some manager who doesn't even know what teamwork is and who will send you packing out the door without any advance notice, that person can just put a sign on the wall that says teamwork, and they think that is teamwork. It's a place like Walmart who treats their employees the way they do, and if you don't know how they treat them, look it up. Having the audacity to call their people team members. I mean, the word team, when I said it has been used and abused and misused, I wasn't lying. The word team and the word teamwork have just, by the political correctness and the human resources, have hijacked that word, the word that represents one of the very best things that human beings are capable of doing collectively. One of the most impressive, awe-inspiring things, and frankly, one of the things that promotes things like peace and harmony and prosperity in our society. They've hijacked the terms team and teamwork, team member, and they've turned it into utter nonsense. And it's one of the biggest problems we have in the business world, whether it's a small business like this truck wash I just showed you, or multinational corporation like this medical device company I told you about, which actually had very good teams, and they were struggling to retain good teams. They were trying so hard to be good teams. But that little bit of handful, out of all their management, that little handful was enough to completely screw everything up. Again, those are the people who should have been escorted to the door. That company would be so prosperous if they had done that, but they didn't. They brought in a president who did everything wrong, and yet he's still getting all the accolades, he's still getting all the pay, he still gets the interviews in the media, he still shakes the governor's hand, and I'm living in a car. And that's the fundamental injustice of the situation we're in. And that's why I'm doing a series called How Not to Do Business. So there you have it, folks. That is my take on teamwork. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. Send me your thoughts, put them in the comments, and think about this carefully and apply it to your own business. I'm telling you right now, I'm giving you gold. I'm handing you gold on a silver platter, or maybe silver on a gold platter. I don't know, but I'm handing you something valuable here. But you got to do something with it. Think about what I just said. Look at that list of attributes of teamwork, and that's probably not even all inclusive. That's just, again, what I came with off the top of my head. Apply this to your business. Apply this to your company. Talk to your managers about this. Sit down and have a powwow with them and say, look, we've got to get our teamwork into real teams so that we are in fact world class. And if we can do that, we can really improve our revenues, our profit, our stability, and the lives of everyone associated with our business. Okay, please. Yes, I live in a car. Don't let that skew your opinion of what I just gave you. I just gave you gold. Take it and run with it. And while you're at it, subscribe to this channel, please. Like any videos that you do like. Leave comments again. Get a discussion going. And remember, I'm doing this in large part to try to get donations and job offers, something that'll get me so I'm not living in this car anymore. I'm running out of resources. I need help badly, please. If you're getting anything out of this at all, give me something back in return. I'm trying to earn it. That's why I'm doing these videos. I'm trying to earn that help. So please help. And please return for the next video. I don't even know what the topic's going to be yet. I have a few ideas. Guess it'll be a surprise for all of us. So thanks for being here. Have a great day, and I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for watching.